But take a look at here how you're kind of watching the character, what she's doing, but you're also in her head seeing what she's seeing. And when you read it, it's seamless. You don't really notice that that's going on, but this is exactly what we do. So pay attention to this a little bit. I crept past Ludi, who sat planted in the green recliner with her basket of crochet yarns and what must have been a Bible. After a wave and a whispered explanation, I tiptoed outside. The air was still and almost icy, my eyes watering from its sting. During the night, I'd awoken shivering, not remembering at first where I was. Across the yard, the mound of bicycle parts glistened with the early morning wetness that I'd always heard was angel tears. Some of the sprockets stared at me, their gaping eyes rimmed with metal eyelashes. It could have been a postmodern sculpture. In New York, you'd fetch big bucks, I told it. Walking would warm me. I crossed the rickety bridge that spanned the creek and started off toward the road to town. I pumped my arms, striding briskly along the rutted lane where evergreens, withered and skeletal, blended into the gray-green of the sage. Tiny had said the trees were infested with a kind of beetle, killing them an inch at a time. This saddened me, and I walked faster. The only colors came from the sunrise and the earth itself, reds and dusty pinks. I was careful to avoid little holes in the ground, which I imagined to be rattlesnake hideouts and tarantula dens. I reminded myself to leave them alone, and they'll leave you alone. Still, a hawk's cry overhead startled me. A small rabbit darted back into the brush. I suspected the poor hare wouldn't get far with the live and let be attitude. That philosophy didn't work as well with other areas of my life either, I discovered. For the last 24 hours, I'd gone along with whatever came and tried not to judge, slept in the corner of the trailer that was so junked out it set my teeth on edge. I walked faster, no longer fighting off the urge to get this rundown place in shape. So we get a sense of where she is, and we're following her as she's walking through this area, and yet we're also in her head, and we're seeing the rabbit, and we're seeing the holes, and all these other things. And you don't really notice that that's what you're doing with your brain and what she's doing with the writing, but this is what we do. We describe what the character's doing, but then we're also seeing through their eyes. And if you spend too much time pondering that, you'll probably go crazy. But that's what we need to do with our camera. We need to make sure that we're showing what our character is seeing, but we also have to drop out of their heads and show where they are in the setting, in that bigger picture. And this is where the zooming in and the zooming out can really be effective. Zooming in, just like we do with the Google Maps, you zoom in, you want to see a lot more detail. Zooming in basically builds tension, and that's one of the strongest ways to tell readers to pay attention to what we're doing. This is a great example of setting up with a medium shot, a two-shot, and then zooming in to pay attention to something in particular. And then there's this moment at the end, which is sort of a pullback. And pullbacks are my favorite because pullbacks are all about sort of like the bigger picture. They're usually those moments where they can also be not a literal pullback in the sense of the camera pulling back, but it's almost like your character has an aha moment and sees a bigger picture. So this is a good example. Meg Mosley's novel, When Sparrows Fall. We have two characters that are in a barn and they're having a discussion, so we got a full shot. And yeah, let me just read this. So Jack moved to the doorway. Leaning against the massive timbers, he studied her profile. Her lower lip trembled. "What about the children?" he asked, assailed by vague fears. "Why do you mention them and Mason in the same breath?" She faced into the gloom of the barn again, silhouetted against the sunset. "It's nothing sordid." "What is it?" He moved closer, wishing physical proximity could help him drag the truth out of her. "Tell me." Breathing fast and shallow, she said nothing. He realized he was framing her as if he were the photographer now, memorizing her in case she sent him away for being a bully, in case he never saw her again. The sun caught the quilt on her shoulders in a golden spotlight. The fabrics in the wide border of the quilt didn't quite match the worn and faded fabrics in the center section. In one corner of the centerpiece, the sun highlighted small holes where someone had pulled out stitches that must have been made with thick thread. The stitches had left ghosts of themselves, perhaps the remnants of lettering, like the names she had embroidered on the crib quilts. Drawn closer still, Jack traced the ghost stitches with one finger. 7 or 8 letters, maybe. He stopped breathing. Everywhere, sets of 7. 7 dried roses in the wreath on the door, sets of 7 drawn on the cover of the attendance book, but 6 angels in the Christmas cupboard and 1 more hidden in the kitchen. 6 baby quilts and this one, but only 6 children. Dear God, he said, and Miranda said nothing. So this is a key moment of realization, and she does this beautifully with this zooming in. You know, they're standing and talking in the barn, and she's got this quilt over her shoulders, and all of a sudden he's noticing that the stitches have been taken out. There's this super close-up telling the reader to pay attention and going into the details of the ghosts of the letters that have been, you know, she lost a child and nobody knows this. She just took all the stitching out and there's just this ghost, you know, and it's just beautifully done when you see it in the context of the whole book, because this is a very key moment that she's kept this secret from everybody, right? So that close-up, that zooming in and then angling on that little piece of quilt is very powerful. Now, if she had just told this with sort of a camera from far away, it wouldn't have had the same effect. So